When you're in a better school district, based on the data that most people utilize now, that equates to a higher value of home and getting more return on your investment.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement Podcast. Are you curious about buying a home in the best school district? I'm Casey Smith. Today, I'm joined by Paul Montaperto, owner of Family to Family Relocation. Each week, we bring you practical advice on retirement, investing, and planning for your financial future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Let's get started. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Casey.
So thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's talk about you for a second, because this is your first podcast with us. So you're a realtor.
I am. That's the full-time gig right now.
I know you as my child's former middle school principal.
That's where we first met years ago. That is true.
Which makes you an expert on housing and schools.
That is the niche.
Because you literally now are masters of both. So,
well, trending that way. I don't know if you ever get to mastery, but on that journey for sure.
That's right. That's right. So tell me a little about your business and what you're focused on in the real estate space and how that relates to education.
Yeah, absolutely. So full-time real estate now with family to family relocation and real estate, and leveraging over 20 years of experience in education to really further develop a niche in that school space. Looking at best fit schools for families who are moving. And so when you are moving, we have found that most people consider, where are my kids going to go to school? Even for families or people who don't have kids, school districts relate to resale value. That's kind of the nature of the beast, and it has been for many, many years. But I will tell you that what I've found in these last 18 months to 2 years of really diving into this and looking at the way that the direction that education is moving is, it is, in my opinion, becoming a little bit less about the rating of that school district and more about what's the best option for my child, because public schools are only one small piece of the puzzle. Private schools, charter schools, hybrid schools, online schools, the education landscape has changed drastically. And so my goal is to educate people about what their options are first, which is where we branded Schools First Real Estate. That's my hashtag that we're putting out there.
Right.
And then once they decide where they want to consider for schools, then we'll start looking at homes. That's what we do.
Okay. So when you go, I haven't moved like since 2007 because there's too much stuff in the basement and my wife won't give anything away. So I've just determined that I'm going to probably go out feet first because but I do look at houses all the time. I think, man, if we didn't have all this stuff, that'd be a really cool place to move to.
Well, moving is a good excuse to purge too.
We can't purge, Paul. You can't purge.
I understand that hurdle's big.
Yes, I was purging one day and my son comes down the steps and he says, "Why is mom crying?" I'm like, "I don't know why mom's crying." We go upstairs and Ethan, my oldest son, he's like, "Mom, why are you crying?" And I'm standing there going, "I don't know what's going on right now." And all of a sudden she goes, "Your dad's getting rid of all my memories." I don't know what it was. I was like, there's a box of stuff we haven't looked at in like 25 years.
Yes. But to her, that needed to stay.
That was
because there might come a day. There might come a day.
That was the day I realized I was never moving.
Sure.
But I do look at houses all the time. And so one of the things that you see is like the school rating number. And, I grew up here, so I kind of know, right?
Sure.
But most people haven't grown up here. So what do those ratings really mean? Is it a legit scale? Is it, how do they come up with those numbers? Is it all the people who failed classes or the teachers have poor grades, or I don't know, how does that get there?
That's an awesome question, Casey. And it's huge because when I'm working with folks that are moving and they want to consider schools, greatschools.org is one of the first places that they go to.
I didn't even know about that. Greatschools.org.
That is one of the most popular sites where it's a ranking out of 10. So, some people are like, well, it's an 8 out of 10. I feel good about that. Ooh, it's a 2 out of 10. We're going to go somewhere else.
Right.
Zillow posts those right on their platform where, when you're looking at the different criteria of the house, you can see the greatschools.org ratings. A few others are schooldigger.com, private school review for private schools. Niche.com is another big one. And I will tell you that schools, especially in the private school world where it's competitive and you're trying to draw people in, they will leverage the opportunities to share their data with those companies so that they can elevate their rating. Now, to your question is, are they real? Do they matter? They are real. It's a compilation of tons of data, typically based on in the public school world, test scores, because the kids in grades 3 through 8 all have to take that end of class or end of year test every year in April or whenever they do it. In high school, they have to take the end of course tests, and all of that data is public record. So these sites pull that in, and then they rate the schools based on their performance, and sometimes with regards to the standard deviation, and we won't get into all that kind of stuff. But I say all that to say this: I caution people, because that is just one small piece of the puzzle. And the reality is, let's take Walton High School, nationally recognized for many, many years, right here in Cobb County in East Cobb.
Right.
I believe they're the 4th or 5th ranked high school in the state right now. Top public school ranked in the state. Maybe Lassiter and Pope are right up there with it. But Walton High School may be great for some kids, but for other kids, it's not. Because it really depends on what their needs are, what kind of learning resources or instructional plan that those children need. Because every kid, as you know, you have 3, they all learn very differently. Their experiences at the same school have all been different over the last several years. And so that is another piece of the education part that I'm trying to impart on the general public through the launch of my own podcast, and certainly when I meet with new clients. And that is, hey, let's take that rating that you're latched onto with many grains of salt. I'm not saying it's not accurate or not true, but it's just one part of the puzzle. Because if your child has a certain set of needs based on what they're looking for, whether they're gifted or, have dyslexia or whatever it is, we've got to make sure that that school that's a 9 out of 10 has a program that best suits your child, as well as we see a lot of mental health stuff with high school kids, anxiety, depression. It's magnifying based on the pressure that a lot of schools are putting on kids in order to get into college.
Right.
You know that world, right? I mean, you've done it with your son. You're looking at it with your daughter now. And some kids struggle with that anxiety and depression. And if they're in a school that's a high pressure cooker, it is not good for them, from their mental health. And so I try to look at that whole big puzzle. And with my background in education, I have a system in which I can evaluate and analyze what a child's academic profile is, and then, point parents in directions of things that they should consider and others that they shouldn't.
Typically what you see is the higher ratings have higher home values because people are gravitating toward public education with a higher rating, right? Where like in East Cobb versus West Cobb. So in West Cobb, the ratings aren't as good. There's also fewer schools, and values are a lot higher than they were 5 years ago, but nowhere near like what East Cobb would be for the same house.
Yeah, there's some truth to that. I think with your specific example, East Cobb was developed longer before West Cobb. And I think when you see kind of the suburban sprawl that many cities have, further in, usually higher value. As you move further out, the values decrease. But to your point, West Cobb has a few high schools that are 9 out of 10. I think Hillgrove High School and Harrison High School are 2 of the top in Cobb County, similar to what I call the big 3 in East Cobb, and that's Pope, Lassiter, and Walton. And I would say you could take that idea and translate that to any other system or county, at least in the metro Atlanta area.
Right.
And so, but there's other factors that highly influence home value. Convenience. There's, obviously the various architectural details of a home or the size of the lot, but the reputation of school districts is one of those criteria that does influence the home value. So you are right.
What about how does private school work into all this? Because you have just in our area, you have a Mount Perrin, you have a Walker, you have a, I guess, North Cobb Christian's kind of emerging as a school people want to go to. What if you're going to private school, does it even really matter? I mean, other than your commute?
On where you buy your house?
Yeah, where you buy your house.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the only piece that may matter is when you turn around years later to sell it. Because to our point, when you're in a better school district, based on the data that most people utilize now, that equates to a higher value of home and getting more return on your investment. But I will say this, when you think about what's best for families with children who are looking for schools, just looking at the Metro Atlanta area, there's over 100 private schools just in the Metro Atlanta area.
Yeah.
And some that you and I have never heard of. And then some certainly that we have. And with school choice continuing to trend upward, both in our state and I would say nationally now, with kind of what's on the table with the current president in office and what they're looking at for the Department of Education, private schools are going to continue to trend up. When we went through COVID 5 years ago, people were fleeing the public schools and chasing private schools simply because the private schools had a reputation for, number one, being open.
Right.
Parents were tired of teaching their kids at home and fighting with them at the breakfast table and having them stare at a screen. And then they realized that a lot of the private schools had the resources and the capability to provide the best option they could under the circumstances. Well, those families didn't leave. They stayed. Most of them.
Yeah.
And so private school enrollment became extremely competitive in the last 5 years. And so private schools had to pivot and figure out, okay, so now we're all of a sudden on a waiting list. Do we build out? Do we want to grow? Are we kind of in our happy place? But, with regards to real estate, parents should consider private school options geographically when they're buying their house. And again, that's a part of what we do when we say, hey, what part of the city do you want to live in because of your commute? And, those things are real. What are the different aspects of a school that are important to you? Well, public school is great, but hey, did you know there are 4 or 5 great private schools in that same area? So if those are contenders, then take a look at that. And if you want to consider those, then let's look at buying a home with a commute that's realistic for getting to those schools as well.
Yeah. Is that where special needs comes into, or maybe just special needs seems kind of harsh, but even like just dyslexia, you think about Grace Point, right?
So we call it neurodiverse learners. Neurodiverse learners have that population of student has grown tremendously in the last few years. You mentioned dyslexia.
Yeah.
It's 1 in 5 now. 1 in 5 people globally has dyslexia. I mean, that's 20% of our population. Right. And so you matriculate that down to kids. Well, we've got to figure out ways to best serve those kids whose brains are wired differently because they don't learn how to read and write the same way as someone who does not have dyslexia.
Right.
And so schools and teachers and programs had to pivot. The state of Georgia didn't even recognize dyslexia as a special education eligibility until 2019. That's 6 years ago.
Wow.
There were kids that had dyslexia for many, many, many years.
Right.
And so they weren't able to provide the state resources because it wasn't identified as an eligibility.
Right.
But to your point, when you think about those kids who need a different type of learning program, there are some public schools that do that really well, but there are some that don't. There are some private schools that do it really well. There are some that don't. There are private schools that are designed and built just for kids with dyslexia, like the Skank School down in Buckhead. They're nationally recognized for what they do. You mentioned Grace Point right here in Marietta.
Right.
A Christian school that focuses on working with kids with dyslexia. And so the reality of all of that, Casey, is the general public just doesn't know. That's what I found, that people don't automatically know about all these opportunities that are out there. They go on Zillow, they start looking at homes, and they see what the great school's rating is for that home. And then if it's like an 8 out of 10, they're like, oh, let's look in that school district. So they just start looking at homes but they don't know anything other than that. There could be 2 great private schools around the corner that, might be a good fit for them. Yeah. And so again, that's where we come in and try to educate them in that.
I think people who have resources, we're mostly people who are listening to this podcast who use a wealth management firm.
Sure.
I think choosing your kid's education is one of the hardest things to do. We had our daughter at a private school in East Cobb. It was a small school. Went through, I guess I went through 8th grade, and they totally botched a bad situation where a teacher quit mid year. Not supposed to be able to do that. You're supposed to like punish them for that. Actually,
Right.
Nothing happened. They let her leave, and then next thing you know, our daughter's not learning any math. And so all of a sudden it became, oh gosh, we gotta make a change like here pretty quick. And so you just never know what's going to happen. Even when things are running really well for years, then all of a sudden it can switch on you. It could be one teacher. It could be a lot of different things.
Different principal, different leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
All of that matters. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's where I think it's critically important when parents are making decisions about where their children are going to go to school. You got to get on campus, whether it's a public school or a private school. Because when you walk into that building, whether, again, it's Due West Elementary School, which is a public school here in West Cobb, or it's, Mount Perrin Christian School, there's a sense of feeling you're going to get and talking to the people, seeing the people, peeking your head in classrooms to get an understanding of what are their priorities, how do they kind of handle their day to day, ask the right questions. That's another thing is we arm people with the right questions to ask that are beyond your, hey, what's your class size? Those, which are good questions, but we got to dig a little bit deeper, specifically around who your child is to see if that's the right fit. And then values too. Different families have very different values. Right. And it's hard for, at least for me, it would be hard to drop my kids off at a school if I know that they're being infused with values that are heavily different than what my values are,
right?
Whatever they are. And so, I think it's important that parents consider that. You mentioned the affordability too. And that is one thing that I would really encourage parents to not shy away from a private school that they deem expensive or even potentially elitist is sometimes how that perception is, because there are lots of resources, financial, that are available through the school.
Yep.
So schools have endowments, they have opportunities to provide financial aid, but also, at least in the state of Georgia, and I think we're going to see this continue to develop across the country with grants and opportunities to take state-funded money and apply that to a private school tuition. If a child has special needs and they're identified with having one of those 13 special eligibility criteria, then they can take that funding through Senate Bill 10 and apply that to a private school tuition. Now, it's likely not going to pay all of it,
right?
But it helps. They
just here at Wiser, we pay our corporate taxes or a portion of it into the Georgia Gold program.
Yes, the Georgia Gold Scholarship Program.
Which you can pick the school. So we choose our kid's school. It goes right to the school. And I mean, I don't get to choose who it's used for. I wouldn't even know.
Right.
I couldn't even pick the person out. Right. But the idea is that it's tax money that gets rerouted, and there's a cap on it. Every year the cap is met typically by summertime, and so if you enroll after the summertime, you can't do it. Right. Individuals can give $10,000 a year,
absolutely,
of your state taxes. It's not a tax deduction. It's just you get to choose where your money goes.
Exactly, you're going to pay your taxes, but now you can have it pushed towards helping a family somewhere,
right?
At the school that you choose. And the great thing about the Georgia Gold Scholarship is every year it's under legislation for increasing the ceiling. And I don't know that it's ever gotten turned down. I mean, it's in the Senate right now. And so what I see that as the state of Georgia believes in school choice.
Correct.
They want to arm every family with the opportunity to contribute to that as well as access that. And so that affordability that I forget the number, but there was a Senate bill that was passed last year that identifies any family who's in a school district who is in the lowest 25th percentile, lowest quartile based on test scores, can choose to take their child to any school, including private school, with their state funds.
Yeah.
And so that's another way for helping folks who are struggling, their kids are struggling, to give them something so that they can subsidize whatever the cost is at their school of choice.
Are you curious why annuities keep coming up as a potential investment option? People are often told that annuities can effectively mitigate investment risks and help secure their financial future. However, annuities often benefit the salesperson and might not be the best choice for you as a consumer. To learn more about the various types of annuities, the negatives of owning them, and better investment alternatives, we have a free ebook on our website just for you. To download our ebook, Buyer Beware, Why Do They Keep Trying to Sell You That Annuity? Simply click the link in the episode notes or visit wiserinvestor.com/guides. Now let's get back to the episode.
Going back to asking the right questions, even in my own kids' school, I see kids with certain needs that can't be met because the school's not really equipped to handle children of that manner, and the parents, I don't know if the parents aren't asking the right questions, or they just assume just because you pay a big tuition doesn't mean that your kid's actually getting what's best for them.
Absolutely.
And so that's something that's super important, because you have to understand that private school is a business, and therefore they need to fill seats. And so they might say yes to somebody to fill a seat, but the child's not going to get the help that they need. So you have to be very careful of that. Don't equate paying more for something as the best.
Sure. And not just paying more, but the grandeur of the facilities, or
Yes.
all of that kind of stuff
Right.
that you can really get enamored
Just because the
by.
basketball court and baseball court or baseball field are really nice doesn't mean
absolutely. And the volleyball teams won 3 state championships, or they
Right.
serve
unless your
filet
kid plays
mignon in the cafeteria or whatever it is. Yeah, it's easy to get really enamored by that, but that is a huge point, and something that I speak with folks all the time, and that is you've got to do your due diligence. Hiring an educational consultant, which is part of what I do as related to real estate, can be a great asset to making sure that the right questions are being asked, because sometimes schools think they can serve a certain type of child, but the reality is they aren't, because they don't truly understand the nature of whatever that learning disorder is that the child has, or the training that's needed, and the person that they're hiring to put in front of that child or that group of students.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for years, and this still happens, we equate compliance with learning. Child's good. They sit, they listen, they're not a behavior problem. You see this more in private schools, right? Because private schools don't have to put up with behavior.
Right.
And while the child is sitting compliant and good, they're not necessarily learning. And so kids have struggled. And now 2 to 3 years of that, they've lost all that learning. And so that's where it becomes, again, very critical to make sure that a school has the right instruction and program to teach your child. Not just a child who has a learning disorder, but, for kids who are, twice exceptional, kids who are gifted, and they get bored real easy, or whatever it is. Those are the things that you really want to peel back on that onion to make sure that we're not just, sticking everything in front of everybody and everyone's doing the same thing and we're checking the box and then we move on to the next unit and all that, which is kind of the traditional model of education for many, many years.
Right.
With that said, I applaud many schools today who are becoming much more innovative in their approach. And innovative does not mean just hanging a TV on the wall instead of a dry erase board.
Right.
It doesn't, putting a computer in the kid's hands and doing a worksheet on a computer. That's not being innovative. It's innovative in focusing on the metacognition of how kids are learning, and building lessons and projects and opportunities for kids to ingrain themselves in learning that is relevant to what's happening in today's world, that's exciting and interesting to them, but also is allowing them to become a better reader, a better writer, a better mathematician, or whatever the case may be.
What do you think most people are overlooking when they evaluate schools?
I think I'll go back to where they are just trusting what they see on a website, or they see on a rating, and the kid will go to the bus stop in the morning, or they'll drop the child in carpool at the curb, and they've never stepped foot in the building.
Yeah.
They haven't introduced themselves to the teacher or the principal, and I don't know if that's asking a lot. I know the busyness of life, but for me, my kids are the most important thing in my world.
At our old school, there was a new headmaster, and I remember going in to meet him just briefly, and I said, so what benchmarks are you guys using in looking at other schools and where this school sits as far as education and things like that? Because there were some issues that were starting to kind of appear. And
Sure.
there's always going to be issues. It's just how does leadership react to it? And his response was, "Oh no, we don't look at what anybody else is doing. I don't know that it really matters." I was like, "Whoa, okay." I can't imagine running my own firm and not doing benchmarking. I mean, heck, we benchmark on price. Am I more expensive, less expensive than the competition? What services is the competition providing? What's my growth rate? I could get down the whole list of how you manage a company.
Sure.
And so I just remember thinking, I went home and I was like, "Hey, I don't know about this." I said, we have no standards other than we teach the Georgia standards, which drives me crazy. It's like, if we teach the Georgia standards, why are we here?
Right.
Why don't we go somewhere else or somewhere?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's free. A couple of things. Let's talk about zoning. So I know I've never had to worry about zoning because my kids have been in private schools, but when you get rezoned, is this something that happens a lot? I mean, I don't think McEachern High School has a very good rating anymore. But when I was a kid, McEachern High School was like, if you went to McEachern, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Yeah. But somehow it changed in the last 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it changed with the population growth. Hillgrove High School wasn't there. Right.
Okay.
And so, with population comes the building of new schools.
Yeah.
And so, and then, home values, like you said, they're tied to that. And so a certain demographic can afford a higher home value versus another demographic that can't afford that. And those are typically tied to those areas. But with regards to zoning and changing zoning.
But let me go back to that. It goes back to my shiny example again. It's a shiny new school. Okay. The other schools just fine. I mean, McEachern used to be a former college. I mean, it's a very nice facility. Well, it was. I haven't been there.
Sure. No, it still is. They got a beautiful new gymnasium.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what made that happen? I mean, I understand the population grew, but did they draw the districts to a troubled area and said, okay, they're going to go to McEachern? If you lived in McEachern district because that's where the school needed to be for your kid.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, because teachers probably change, right? Teachers leave, they go to other schools.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you this: if you want to get people really upset, then tell them that their child is no longer going to go to the school that they like going to because they're being rezoned.
Yeah, but it seems to happen a lot.
Well, it happens because of it's the fallout of population growth.
Yeah,
a school has a certain capacity based on the size of which it can hold in the number of students. And when you reach that capacity, actually, most schools will go over that capacity.
So what happens in newer areas today, the homes are much more expensive. More expensive homes means more affluent families. And that's how you end up with that situation. Then you end up with more affluent families going to one school, which means they're also writing checks to the school annual fund and supporting the school, where in the other district, those affluent families have now left, and there's no extra investment.
That is obviously a byproduct of that. But
you think the counties would know that?
I've never been on a zoning committee or anything like that, but just being in that world for many years, my understanding is that number one, they try to handle it sensitively.
Yeah.
But I think we'd be lying if we didn't know that they're looking at specific neighborhoods.
Right.
And when they draw a line that goes crooked and around and all of that, that is maybe something that they're doing to prevent a riot or to keep a certain neighborhood in a certain school. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it boils down to the number of kids.
Yeah.
And so when a school reaches that capacity and they decide, hey, we're going to build the new school over here, we've got to figure out what other schools are we going to pull from to now feed that school? Obviously, it's geographically based, but they are looking at every little neighborhood. Because if you get on the map and you look at the attendance lines, they're not straight lines.
No, they're not.
They
draw them like politicians.
They do.
Republican, Democrat. Okay, we're going to give you, the Democrats, we're going to give you this district, and we're going to take this district, and then it guarantees that their people get reelected instead of being a really close district.
Right.
Where you maybe it could go either way, right?
Yeah. Now, I will say, like, Cobb County does, in my experience, and I graduated from high school in Cobb County and left this area for a while and then came back, but they have hearings, they announce it a few years ahead of time, and people have an opportunity to be heard. And,
but if you're buying a house, that's something you should pay attention to. Hey, there's a new school going in over here.
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, but you should pay attention to the density of that area with the school that you're looking at. Is if the capacity of that school is 3,000 kids, and they've got 3,600, well, then rezoning's coming soon. Yeah. And you can find out by contacting the district office, if we're talking about public education, on, what are their plans for building a new school? Because they start that process years out.
Okay.
But to be honest with you, I don't know that I've ever had a client, a buyer, who's ever gotten, we've ever had to really unravel that. But it is real. And if you plan on hunkering down for raising your family in a space for many, many, many years, I don't know that you can prevent that, because it just depends on how quickly that area grows.
So how do you help families choose between pricing of a house and then the school district and the commute? I mean, you have to there's probably a sacrifice somewhere. You're sacrificing the commute for the school, or you're sacrificing the price that they're going to spend more money than they should on the home. Maybe
there's no perfect scenario. And you said you haven't shopped for a home in a while. It's like you think you know what you want, but until you get out there and start looking, it changes. For example, I work with a client and I have a questionnaire that asks, price range, and do you want a basement? What size lot? All that kind of stuff. What area? How important are schools? What are the factors of school that are important? And we'll fill all that out, and we use that to then start looking at homes. Well, if they said, they didn't want a basement, well, all of a sudden we're looking at basement houses, and you have to say, well, hey, did something change? Well, yeah, I kind of like a basement now. And so that certainly happens. But to your point, there is no perfect scenario. But in my opinion, and where I'm really leaning in hard on this part of real estate is, if you have children, educating them is one of the most important things that you'll do for them.
Right.
And not all schools are created equal. And if you think that you can only afford public school, think twice, because there are a lot of ways to subsidize a tuition for private school. But there are various ways to evaluate both any school, and I can help you with that by the system that I've created to look at those different things. Geography is important. If you work in Lawrenceville, you're not going to live in Cartersville.
Right.
That's it would be very difficult.
Yeah.
For whatever, or you're not going to live in Fayetteville. And so geographic components matter. But even within that geographic area, there are going to be a ton of schools to choose from. There's going to be a ton of houses to choose from, at all different values.
Right.
And so, at least that's the way Metro Atlanta is laid out is, it's not that just one area of Metro Atlanta has $1 million homes. There are multiple different areas. And then on the flip side, houses, starter homes, which are around, $300,000 to $400,000 now.
Yeah.
And so, looking at the school piece first, whether you have children or not, is how we've built our system. And then I've had folks saying, it doesn't matter. Okay. So we'll put that aside. Yeah. What matters most? What matters most is me not having an HOA. Okay. So then we're not going to look at neighbors with HOA. And so, everyone has their different spin on what they're looking for. And like I said, that sometimes changes through the process. Even with price range. They get pre-approved for a loan if they're using a mortgage to purchase a home. Mm-hmm. And, there are different ways for us to structure those opportunities and negotiate. Price is just one element of negotiating on the purchase of a house. Yeah. Sometimes people need the time frame's important, or, the things that are on the property that they don't want to move, or a variety of different things.
What do you think what are some best kept secrets? Locations, housing locations, school district, maybe somebody hasn't really valued as much. You think with the metro Atlanta area, where would you go?
Areas?
Yeah.
That's a great question, Casey. I mean, it really depends on what you like. Like for me, I want space. I want a little bit of space. I always have a dream of having a little bit more land than what we have now. And like you were saying earlier, I always look at houses too.
Yeah.
I know we're not going to move. We love our neighborhood. My kids are entrenched with the kids in the neighborhood. And, until Ben graduates from high school, there's really no reason for us. I mean, we have a 2.75% interest rate. I don't want to trade that for 6.5 either,
exactly.
right? Because that's where we are right now. But I will say this: when you look at Metro Atlanta, what's really cool that's happened in probably the last 10 or 15 years is the downtown areas of all the towns are being revitalized.
Yeah, absolutely.
Around here, you just look at downtown Kennesaw and what they've done there.
I passed through there recently. I was like, wow, this is Cartersville? I had no idea.
Sure. So you look at Kennesaw, Marietta Square, which is, been a staple in this community, but it looks a lot different today than it did 30 years ago.
Right.
Downtown Ackworth, the mayor's done a great job there. Cartersville, Canton, Buford, downtown Cumming just built a new city center. Lawrenceville in Gwinnett County has done a great job with revitalization. And so I would encourage people to always go and take a look at that, because you can still enjoy suburban living, but have like a tiny little town city center that's kind of cool to go walk and visit shops and things of that nature, which is very different than living in Midtown or Atlanta, which is where my son lives right now. And he's living his best life as a 26-year-old.
They all go down there.
Yeah, absolutely.
They all come back, though.
But eventually he's going to come back
Right.
or go somewhere else, because, he's going to want land at some point.
Right.
I think best kept secrets, it's really just paying attention to the development of what's happening right now and deciding, how far out of the city do I want to live? Do I want to live close to a lake? Those types of things.
Okay. What's the name of your podcast? How do they find it?
So the name of the podcast is The Right School Matters.
Okay.
You can find that by searching for that, or the YouTube channel is Family to Family Relocation.
Okay.
You can find that on there. And I have a pleasure of talking with heads of schools, principals, teachers, even business owners, and it's all based on various aspects of educating the public around what do you want to know about schools. And so, one topic might be about dyslexia, how to figure if your child has dyslexia. What do you do? If you're looking at going to a school that has, a 100-acre campus and all the great facilities and all of that stuff, how do you build your candidacy for being competitive on getting into a school like that? And things of that nature.
We'll link that to our show notes for those listeners who want to follow more. And then let's your website for your company.
www.f2frelo.com.
All right. And then we'll also link to that, as well as your contact email in our show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks for joining us, Paul. Just a few extra things, related episodes. Episode 136, financially preparing for your high schooler to go to college, might be a good listen for people. Everything you need to know about 529 plans, that's episode 168. And episode 225, we had Tom Townsend on talking about housing market trends and changes and what to expect in the housing industry. That's episode 267. We've linked to Paul's website and podcast here as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys again next week.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss any new episodes. We'd also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. This episode was produced by Rachel Dotson. This podcast is strictly for informational purposes only and is not to be considered as investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any financial products, securities, digital assets, or any other investment vehicles, or a basis to make any financial decisions. Wiser Wealth Management Incorporated is a registered investor advisor with the SEC. The host and/or guests may personally own securities, digital assets, or other investment vehicles mentioned on this podcast. Neither the host nor guests of the show are compensated for their participation, and no referral fees are paid to or received by any host or guest for clients, listeners, or similar interests. Investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified financial advisor, tax professional, insurance professional, and/or legal professional before implementing any strategy discussed herein. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.